This is Thrive Perspectives, an ever-growing discussion about the issues that shape our lives with your guides, Dr. Matthew Jacoby and DJ Payne.
Perspectives number 23. It's DJ and Matt. Matt, you've come in this morning, and you know we message. There's a group of us here in Thrive, a small team who put together Thrive, and you're throwing out different ideas for this episode of Perspectives. Yeah. One of the titles that you gave us was "Bigoted and Judgmental?" Christian descent in a culture of unconditional affirmation.
Didn't you like my? Well,
it's very snappy.
Yeah, I was going to call it moral discourse in a post-Christian age, but
you really know how to get the listeners excited to tune in. No, so we decided to call, as of course, dear listener, you know by looking at this in your podcast app, we've called this one Judgmental and Bigoted. And I really like that we're doing it now. This is coming out a week. If you're listening to it as it comes out, it's a week before Christmas. And a lot of times, you know, around Christmas, we're coming together with a family, we're coming together with friends, and as a believer, we might be sitting there with uncles, aunts, cousins, friends who aren't believers. And sometimes some pretty spicy topics come up, whether that's politics or people's lifestyles, and all of a sudden the Christians are on one side and we are getting accused of being bigoted, judgmental. Hey, Jesus says that we should love everybody. How dare you? All these type of things. So I think you've actually put your finger on, something that is really important for us today.
Yeah, I think this is an important topic. It's something that is topical because the media loves to caricature, and it is a bit of a caricature of Christians. I think that's the first thing to realise, and something that I point out when people say, well, Christians are bigoted and judgmental, and the first thing that I like to point out is to say, look, the media is always going to jump on the most sensational examples. They're always going to be the most extreme examples, and what people invariably describe, I say back to them as someone that's been to hundreds and hundreds of churches, not only around Australia but around the world. I say, I don't know people who were like this. You know what I mean? You're painting a caricature. I've been a Christian for decades, and I've been all over the world. I don't know anyone really personally that would. Yeah. I know of people that do.
Yes. And that's the sad thing, because immediately for some people, as soon as you say, you know, I've had this exact conversation many times, over the years. You know, for decades I was a photographer, and in the last decade of me being a photographer, I was a very public persona within the photography industry. I became a very public figure within the Australian industry, and even a little bit around the world. And people were always amazed when I came out as a very blatant, open Christian, because immediately people go, well, hang on, are you one of those Christians? And they go immediately to the Westboro Baptists. Are you holding up a sign that says God hates fags? And are you protesting everything on And I'm like, I don't even think they're Christians. Why are you going to there? You know, it's really hard.
And look, I mean, I think I don't think we should stop there, though. I think recognising that it is a caricature and pointing that out, I think, is important. Okay, because it's just the nature of the media. It's the way that the media works, and it's always going to be the case.
100%.
They're going to grab the most, they're going to polarize. They're going to grab the most sensational things. Media is entertainment, so the sort of moderate person quietly working away. I mean, as I say, look, most of us, most Christian churches around the world just quietly working away, doing their thing, being a positive influence in society, but that doesn't make the news. That's boring, So it's the outspoken that do. However, there are enough examples of outspoken Christians who probably don't do this well, who really confirm this way of this caricature.
And by the caricature, we're talking about like someone who is pointing a finger, fairly nasty, judgmental, bigoted.
Well, it may not actually even be that they're being judgmental and bigoted. I mean, a classic example is the case of Israel Folau. Was that already a couple of years ago?
Yeah, last year, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It was, man, it seems a long time ago.
2020's been a long year.
That's right. Where I don't think there was any intention of, being judgmental and there was a lot of words that were used about it I don't think are true of him, but his approach lacked tact. It was fairly tactless. And,
yes.
Now, I think often that's the problem. So it's the problem of tactlessness.
Yep.
And it's also perhaps a misunderstanding of the situation that we're in, and there's a certain inevitability around us talking about Christian things. There's an inevitability about how that's going to come across if we're not conscious of some of those problems. And I guess what I want to do today is talk about some of those issues, because on the one hand we can say, it's all we're not judgmental and we're not this and we're not bigoted. But we do need to take responsibility for the way that we appear as well. Yeah. And even though, yes, it's a caricature, but are there things that we can do to actually reverse that?
Yeah.
Look, and the primary thing we can do is actually, for a person, meeting one positive example of a Christian will absolutely demolish 100 other bad examples that they've seen impersonally. Okay,
Yeah.
So they just need to meet a Christian who's not like that, and who says, "Look, and all the people around me, the other Christians aren't like that." I mean, I think that personal connection reverses that. But again, there's also, I think, some things that we can do to avoid coming across like that, and that's what I want to talk about today.
It's a complicated, very. There's a big spectrum in this topic, because there's a lot of different angles to look at this. And I've already mentioned, and, it was sort of by accident, my history in the photography realm. I'll bring that in again now because there was a time, when, like you say, meeting one positive Christian can change people. I can't tell you dozens and dozens of times, because I did a podcast within the photography world and I interviewed a lot of people. That's what I talk about in a public thing, and I got to meet a lot of people. So many people would have, I'd get to know them, and then they would find out I was a Christian, or they knew I was a Christian beforehand, and by the end of it I had this type of conversation so many times that it made me laugh. I've always hated Christians, or I had a really bad time with Christians or something, but you aren't like those other Christians. You're different. You're loving or accepting or whatever they wanted to, people express it in different ways. So that was a really,
and I try to point out, actually, I'm not an exceptional Christian. This is actually fairly common. It's just that what you have been given is a caricature that you've generalized from.
Yeah, exactly.
No, and I think I think we can and we should challenge people, because they've seen caricatured versions that they are generalizing from that to everyone, and that actually is a form of bigotry in itself. To take one example and to generalize. It's a very insidious form of prejudice.
Yes.
Where I take a caricature and I generalize that, and I say everyone in this class is like that. So I think that's that is problematic. So there's a look. I saw an article, and it was just an online thing, and it wasn't a very well written article, but it gives a good example of the kind of sort of popular view that's out there. And it says this: Christian churches have a tendency to condemn and shame members of the LGBT community. This practice drives millennials away because they're likely to have a friend who is part of that community. Many young people are also confused and feel like their churches send mixed messages. One common example would be preaching a message about how God loves everyone and then disgracing a person for being themselves. Now, here is where this is a classic caricature.
100%.
Christian churches have a tendency condemning and shaming members. Again, I've been, in all my time, condemning and shaming Westboro, maybe.
Yep.
You know, like that's one of the only examples that I can I can actually think of that actually does this.
Yeah. Yep.
I've never seen a church do this. Now that what they're doing is inferring this from other behaviours, and we'll talk about that in a moment. It also says, you know, preaching a message about how God loves everyone, and then disgracing a person for being themselves. And again, it's interesting to think about what is meant by disgracing for being themselves.
Yes.
I mean, so anyway, this is an example of how a lot of people see the church, and so I think it's important that we talk about this. So I think the first thing is to maybe establish some context, because there's a problem with talking about our values in the world in which we live.
Yes.
Okay. Because it doesn't make sense. We are operating within a worldview, and we are often being heard by people who don't share our worldview, and so we have to be very conscious of how we are coming across. And Christians, particularly Christians who have been Christian a long time, tend to get so locked within their worldview that they lose a sense of how this gets heard. Mm-hmm. Now, one way to reverse this is to have lots of conversations with non-Christian people. This one of the ways that this happens is that Christians lose touch with the world around them.
Amen.
Because they only talk to each other.
Yeah.
If we're only talking to each other, then we lose a sense of the world around us. Yeah. And one of the most healthy things that we can do is have constant conversations about our faith with non-Christian people.
Yes.
And it's only in that, and this is, for me, it's the most rewarding. It's the most rewarding thing.
Yeah.
Because it challenges me to explain my faith in a way that's going to be intelligible to that other person, and that takes some practice.
Yeah. Oh, it does, and it also not only does it take practice, you know, for someone like you, Matt, who is steeped in, you know, theology, Bible teaching, everything like that, but for the ordinary layperson, it makes you. There's no better way to understand a particular subject than to teach that subject.
Yeah.
And I'll go one step further, than to teach that subject or explain that subject to someone who is an adversary to that particular point. Yeah. It makes you understand. And the challenge that I would have for a lot of people who, you know, sit in the pews, and I think people listening to this podcast might be the exception to the rule, but a lot of people who sit in the pews of a lot of churches, they might be, you know, the idea of them explaining their faith or having someone. This is something I love to do with a lot of people, and with the small group that I had and stuff like that. I would say, okay, I'm going to play the advocate here. Jesus didn't have to die on the cross. God's God. He's bigger. He can do anything. Why is this atonement is ridiculous? Explain to me why. And people would just go white. A lot of Christians who believe and have been sitting in the churches for a long time would go, and I'm like, well, you better get across this. Because these are some of the questions. I know I'm going down a rabbit trail here. But the point being that having to explain where you're coming from to someone who doesn't believe is a great way for you to be shored up in your faith. Yeah. This is what happens. So in a sense, what happens when we're only speaking amongst ourselves, and this happens a lot. Okay, Christians, probably more often than not, the tendency is for us to keep our faith to ourselves. Oh, very so much. We talk about faith stuff with Christians, but not with the non-Christians around us. Yeah. Now, what this does is it has a very similar effect to like tribal. It develops a kind of tribalism. Okay, now what happens with tribes, or what happened with tribes, is that they develop their own language, essentially. Dialect, really. I mean, they may have started. Language. It's like they may have started with the same language, but they gradually develop. In isolation, what happens is that you develop a dialect. Okay, now the class, you know, I mean, and you have this in communities in Europe where, I mean, my dad's German is Kölsch, and just in that city of Cologne, they have a Kölsch dialect that is very difficult to understand for a
a speaker of normal, what they call Hochdeutsch. So you get, and so you get this tribal mentality where suddenly we're speaking a language amongst ourselves. That because we only speak it amongst ourselves, we develop this kind of theological or values dialect that people just on the outside just don't understand. Now, this is really, really counterproductive, because our job is to speak not just to each other, but primarily actually to the world around us. We need to be speaking to the world around us. And so what happens in our tribalism, and also the other thing is that we don't realize that we don't understand what we're talking about. We use these words and everyone we just accept them, but we don't, because we're not exposing ourselves to the kind of critique and questions that inevitably is going to come from people on the outside.
Yes.
We don't ask those questions, and so we think we know things that we don't. It's really quite damaging. Now, to take this further, so in a sense, what happens with this kind of tribalism, you get these dialects, and we have these values, and so we become, in a sense, like a fortified city. Imagine in the old days, a walled city. And there's the pagan world out there, and we're the Christians, and what we do is that we sort of lob truth over the wall like a hand grenade. It's like
the holy hand grenade.
We throw it over the wall, and to people on the outside who don't share our language or our worldview,
or even the concept of truth itself.
It's totally nonsensical. And so and Christians can be really insensitive to this, like really insensitive, and they can think that, I was just speaking the truth. As though just speaking the truth is enough. It's like an example I've used before. My son, when he insults his sister by using some truth, or and we'll say, Jeremiah, that's really horrible thing to. Oh no, but it's true.
It's true.
And his point to me, but isn't it true that that this or that happened, or that whatever? Like, yes, but that's not the point. That actually was really horrible. So I think this is something. And again, I'm being very general, and it's this itself is a little caricatured. But just to help people to understand what actually is happening is that just speaking the truth is not enough. We actually need to be aware, and we need to take responsibility for how that comes across, and the effect that has. Yeah.
I guess motivation in those circumstances is a big point, because, sometimes, if the motivation is to build that wall. I mean, I'm going to go really horrible here. If the motivation is to separate truth from lies, sometimes you will be blunt and say, no, this is where it stands. But if you're actually building a relationship with a human being and you want to see that person come to an understanding of the truth, you don't build a wall. You don't draw that line in the sand. Sometimes you need to be a little bit more gracious and hold them by the hand and walk them through it.
So it becomes a journey.
Yeah.
It becomes a journey. So you're not just throwing something at them, but in a form that perhaps makes sense to you.
Yes.
You are actually it's about having a conversation with a person that helps them to understand the perspective of your own worldview, and why that worldview perhaps makes sense. So I think this already is an issue. One of the other things I think that's important, because the issue here is that, so for example, I mean, the big one when it comes to this sort of stuff is ethics, Christian ethics. Now, Christian ethics makes sense within a Christian framework. What people need to understand is, as soon as you take away that worldview framework, the ethics actually doesn't make sense anymore.
No.
So people say, well, it's only fair that this and that should be the case. So take, same-sex relationships, for example. Outside of a Christian worldview, it makes perfect sense that that's just natural. And
So it's a question of ethics and morality, I guess. Morality.
It's mainly in this realm that these kinds of things come up, because a Christian will say, "Oh no, that's wrong," but that just comes across. That's inevitably going to come across really judgmental and bigoted. Those words are problematic in the sense that I'm saying it can come across like that. The word judgmental is used in lots of different ways. It really should refer to a motive.
Yeah.
Yes. But what people are feeling, and again, when people say things like, we need to probably understand how people are feeling.
Yeah.
The feeling is you're coming in on your high horse. You feel like you have the high moral ground, and you are assuming that without any sort of defense, or you just come into this with this sense of entitlement, like you have the high moral ground and you can tell me what's right or wrong.
Yeah.
So that's behind
that's the worldly thinking. That's
behind the feeling of I feel that you're judgmental. Now, I think we should listen to that and try not. We need to do our best not to come across like that.
Yeah.
And actually, I think we shouldn't come in with a sense of entitlement. That we shouldn't come in assuming something about. We can come in with conviction.
Yes.
But we shouldn't be sort of riding in and just throwing the truth at people as though, well, you should just accept this.
Yeah.
Because again, they don't share our worldview, so it's just not going to make sense to them. Now, this brings me to the main point. How does someone's worldview actually fundamentally change? How does your whole view of the world and of life and of God, how does that all change?
Okay, so let's bring it back to the practical. You've laid out some great ground rules there. So the practical, as let's go back to the scenario I said at the beginning.
Yeah.
You're spending Christmas with your cousins this year. The family's finally get together. You're able to travel and you spend Christmas. Look, and you know that one of your cousins has a lifestyle that you don't agree with, whatever that is. And again, even if we want to say one of the scenarios that you've already painted, might be part of the LGBTQ, community.
Yeah.
And you know that they're going to want to come to you and say, well, what do you think? What do you, as a Christian, think of this?
Yeah.
So the question is, how do we actually go about of understanding that they have a completely different worldview, perspectives, understanding what the truth actually is to us? How do we meet that?
So the first thing to recognize is that they do not have a framework that will allow them to understand your ethical position.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is not being defeatist. What I'm suggesting here is a better process. Okay. So rather than just operate on an ethical and just talking ethics, I think all roads need to lead to the gospel here. And this is really fundamental stuff here.
Love it.
Because again, I asked the question, how do people change? It's through the work of the Holy Spirit in their lives, regenerating them. And Paul says the gospel is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. Okay.
Amen.
So we need to get things back to the main message, okay? And I think everything can lead back to the main message. And I try to, in a sense, with those conversations, not evade the question, but try to lead from that issue back to the main issue, and to actually challenge their worldview, in a sense, with a theistic worldview of a God who has an absolute claim on them, who loves them, who is calling them back to himself, and who has made that possible in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's the message that I want to ultimately come to. Now, I think we can get there. So
right, well,
let's suggest some ways into this.
Okay, this is good, because immediately my mind goes to an aggressive atheist who doesn't want to have anything to do with any God claims or anything
so
like
let's
that.
Let's be
and
clear.
that's painting a picture.
Yeah.
That's painting a really stereotype.
So what I'm
there.
trying to be clear on is actually, what is our mission here?
Yep.
Now, our mission is not to be moral crusaders, because again, our moral discourse, our moral statements, our ethical, it's not going to make sense to people who don't share our worldview. Okay, so that's not going to work. We are heralds of the good news of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Let's get to the basics here. Okay, and we need to stay on message.
Yeah.
And so everything needs to lead, because otherwise it's going to be combative the whole time, right? And they are going to see you as the enemy and so forth. And that's the last thing that we want to do, because we are representatives of a God who loves them and who was reaching out to them, unconditionally reaching out to them.
Amen. While we're yet sinners, Christ died for us. So before you even begin, I would say step one, fundamentally know what the gospel means. Fundamentally know what the good news is. Why did Jesus have to come to die? If you can't answer that in your own life, in your own mind, and answer those big questions by yourself, you can't even enter this conversation in the way that you're proposing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's my ability to and your ability and our ability in each situation to summarize the good news in our own words, in general terms, that's going to make sense to the other person. That's probably the most important thing in this. So let's set up. Let's set up a situation here and perhaps address some of the key things that come up, okay, and suggest perhaps a route from those issues to the gospel. Okay, let's see if we can.
I love it.
If we can map this way. Now, one of the key things that Christians get challenged with is, will you affirm this, a person? I mean, it's not necessarily even coming from someone from within the. And so, at the moment, I'm just going to use the LGBT example.
It's a topic that comes.
Okay, so
comes
that's the hottest topic.
Yep.
Okay, so let's just use that as an example. Right? It's not the only one, but we'll go with this for the moment. The concern that people have is they're not content just to agree to disagree. They don't want to agree to disagree. The challenge to Christians is you need to will you affirm this? Okay. Yeah. I've had letters written to the church by people that are just testing the waters. Yeah. Does your church affirm this? Okay. Yeah. And this is,
and they might not be your friends or your cousins, your family might not be as aggressive as that, but they might ask in a different way. They might even be asking you, "Well, do you think this is wrong?" And that's that's another way of asking you to affirm, to say, well, if you don't think it's wrong, it's
that's
right.
Yeah. So, I mean, for example, my daughter applied for a job, and one of the conditions of the job is, can you affirm the LGBT community? You need to affirm it in order to work here. I mean, okay, so that's a thing.
Yep.
And so this is what I mean. This, you actually come across this. I've had this from a person actually in this situation from within this community who said, you need to affirm I want you to affirm my choices, my identity here.
It's not we now live in a society or in a culture where you just can't say, hey, you're welcome here at the church.
Yeah.
You now have to say, no, you're welcomed, and I affirm your lifestyle.
Let's get behind this issue. So the reason for this challenge is because it becomes an identity thing. This is where the affirmation thing, because it's about, can you affirm me?
Yes.
And who I actually am.
Yeah.
Okay. This is in that quote. It's talked about disgracing a person for just being themselves. Okay. Now, this is where, and again, I would already challenge that. I would say, I mean, recently in a conversation, would say, well, when you say affirm, this is about your identity, right? Affirm you as a person. And I would say the problem with that is where we think our identity lies. I absolutely want to, I 100% affirm your identity, but I am convinced that your identity lies in something much, much deeper than your sexuality.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is to recognize that actually our identity doesn't lie in these surface elements. And I think, and I would say, I said to that person, I feel like you are actually doing yourself a disservice by locating your identity at a fairly shallow level.
Yeah.
I think there's something much deeper to personhood, something much more fundamental. And I think, and I said, I feel convinced that I would do you a much greater service to affirm your identity at a much deeper level. Then there's another thing that I would suggest. I would say, and this is one of the key sort of problems in a lot of this dialogue as well, is this perception that people have that we're saying we're right and they're wrong, that we're saying we're in the right, we've got it all together, and you haven't. Yeah. So, it could, from me as a heterosexual, I could be heard to say, my sexuality is right, your sexuality is wrong. Now, we need to correct that. Okay. Now, what we need to correct in that is not that both are right, but that actually both are wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. This is because actually what we want to say, and again, let's think worldview here. Think your worldview, because fundamentally, I have said, I actually, when it comes to sexuality, having made the identity point, when it comes to sexuality, I don't affirm my own sexuality as the way that it is, because I feel like we're all broken, and one of the most fundamental things about real living people is that life means change and growth. Okay, and that means a process of becoming. Yep. Okay, and so I believe we are on a journey from brokenness towards the way that God made us to be,
to wholeness.
And that God is inviting us all on that journey. Now, you see, straight away, I'm getting closer to the gospel here.
Yes,
I believe God is inviting us on a journey of change. Anyone can be part of this journey. Doesn't matter where you come from. Everyone is invited. Yep. There's only one condition: you have to want to change. Yep. And it's not just sexuality; it's everything is going to change. So you need to put everything in the hands of God and allow God to completely reshape your life.
Your very identity.
That is letting God be God. And I explain, letting God be God, the other word for that is faith.
Yeah.
And so God is calling us to that. And anyone can put themselves in God's hands because of what Jesus did. That's how we experience God. Yep. It's like you can experience God if you put your life in His hands and allow Him to shape you. But this is the way that I am, and you need to affirm the way that I am. That is actually going to rob you of a life of transformation, because you are creating a solid version of yourself.
All right.
That is problematic.
This is really you've hit in a topic that I really want to push back on in a little bit. There's something particular that's going on in our culture right now as we speak that I think that's really interesting in what you're saying. Let's take a quick break. Got some exciting news to share with you in the break, but when we come back, we're going to keep on pursuing this topic about judgmental, bigoted Christians, those bigoted Christians, and we'll get into that more in Thrive Perspectives. Hey, it's DJ here for Thrive Perspectives, and I'm interrupting all you judgmental and bigoted Christians just right now to let you know, I'm joking of course, to let you know of a great way about bridging the divide. If you've got someone in your life who's a musician or someone who loves great music, well, have you heard about Sons of Korah? Sons of Korah is Matthew Jacoby's band, and I know you appreciate his knowledge and his theological input and our worldview discussions here on Thrive Perspectives. But did you know that he and his band have been putting the Psalms to music for decades now, and they've got their own app. You can find it just by searching in the App Store, Sons of Korah. That's Korah. Sons of Korah. Search for that in the App Store and it'll pop up straight away. Now, I've been reminded here by the developers of the app to let you know that it is a subscriber-supported app. You can download it for free and check it all out, but as a supporter, you can get all the recorded music, including exclusive releases not available anywhere else. You can download them to the app so you can play them offline. You'll get new releases in the app at least 3 months before anywhere else. Sheet music for selected psalms is available in the app. Commentaries written by Matt Jacoby on the psalms are all recorded. The video clips and new video recordings are coming in the app. I'm so excited about that. Latest news, behind the scenes videos. and we've got some more exciting things. All of that is available as a quarterly subscriber to Sons of Korah. And I tell you what, that directly goes to support this amazing musical ministry. If you're looking for a way to bridge the gap for people over these holidays, maybe check out Sons of Korah. You might be really surprised, and you can recommend and even give a gift of subscribing one of your to your your family members there, and they can get into the Word of God through the Psalms through the band Sons of Korah. Check that out at sonsofkorah.com, or head over to the App Store and search Sons of Korah. Again, that's spelled Korah. We're going to have some more information about that on the upcoming episodes. But right now, let's get back into the discussion here with Matt about how we can bridge those gaps to those unbelieving friends and family members as we try not to be judgmental or bigoted in this episode of Thrive Perspectives. We are back. It's episode 23 of Thrive Perspectives. DJ and Matt here, and we're looking at a big picture here of conversation, really, and the way that we communicate the gospel and getting past the stereotype of the judgmental, bigoted Christian. Matt, you brought up something, and we've backed ourselves into a corner in one point because we keep on coming back to the LGBTQ type of thing. Only because that's a big conversation.
Yeah, and we're using that as an example.
That as an example. Now, literally, in front of the government right now in Victoria is the I've forgotten what it's called, persuasion or something bill that says that no person can, it's been advertised, and on the front of the tin it says we want to get away from these harmful, horrible practices of these churches or different organizations saying that they can cure homosexuality or cure some sort of sexual perversion. So they don't want to have any, it's not transformer, what do they call it?
Conversion therapy.
Conversion therapy, thank you. That's the phrase I was looking. So we want to get away from this horrible conversion therapy. If you suggest any conversion therapy or do it yourself, it's a $10,000 fine, 2 years in prison. If you send someone out of state for any conversion therapy, it can still be a fine in prison. If you do anything around these things, it can be conversion prison. Now, if you actually look into some of the statements, it's pretty hardcore. They want you to affirm someone's lifestyle. Now, this is now getting into law.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What you're saying. So how are we supposed to walk through this? Because it looks like it's going to happen. I don't think this bill is going to be shot down in our state level parliament or thing. I think it's going to get carried through.
Yeah, and this is where we need to exercise our democratic, and right and argue for a society in which we get to practice our faith.
Yes.
I think, though, it's important as we do that. So there's something that we can and should do in that, and I think we should engage in that issue. I'm all about the how and how we sound when we do.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's and we are a democracy, so we do have a voice in that. But we need to also be mindful of the sound of the voice, because sometimes we can be so us-focused. Yeah. We need to protect our right to make sure we can do what we want.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we need to make sure that we're first and foremost minding
everybody's.
Everyone, and particularly our mission, so we need to come across in a way that expresses concern for a certain kind of society. And so rather than it's just about us and what we want, we need to be approaching this issue in a way that says the best kind of society is a free society in which these differences can coexist, and that allows for dialogue, allows for different positions to challenge each other. Now this is an interesting issue, and there's an interesting book at the moment because it's the allowing the differences to challenge each other. This is something I think that is so fundamental. So, for example, it's fundamental to the education system, where we allow different views to be brought together to challenge one another.
Yes.
But increasingly, and this is a topic of a book that one of the more interesting books I've read in this last year, called The Coddling of the American Mind. And I just can't remember the author's name. It's just slipped my... Coddling of the American Mind.
We'll have it in the show notes.
And the author argues that there is a kind of hyper-safetyism that's happened in our culture that treats language as unsafe in some way. That there
violence.
that language that words can be violence, and there is this alarmist, catastrophizing kind of language and ideas around this idea that your view is creating an unsafe space. So even just the context of what you think, your view, certainly once you express that creates an unsafe space for certain people. And the writer, I think it might be Jonathan Haidt actually, he... Haidt. The author argues actually the key to our growth as human beings
Amen.
is opposition
Amen.
And challenge.
Yes.
And if we don't have this, we don't grow and we don't develop. And so he talks about this coddling that's happening that actually is actually making us fragile. And his argument is, in fact, as human beings, we are anti-fragile in the sense that challenge is good for us. So the more we're challenged, the more we grow. And he's a psychologist, and he argues that compellingly. And so I think.
And I'm sure he's arguing it from a non-Christian perspective.
He's arguing from a non-Christian perspective, actually. So this is not a Christian book. And so he's concerned about the environment, particularly in universities, where the opposite view is not. They just won't countenance that view. They're not going to tolerate that view at all. And they'll protest out, and shut them up, and and it's always, this is an unsafe space. You are like, your view is causing people to commit suicide. You get that catastrophizing language that is just not true, and so that creates this situation that he talks about in terms of this coddling that actually it makes people fragile, and it prevents growth. And so I think we should challenge that. And
it does more harm. People can't see that it does more harm. Like I feel pretty strongly about this, this bill that's in front of the local government at the moment, the statewide government at the moment. So I've got the information, I've written, emailed the politicians, and and I've got some language from different lobbying groups to say how to do it and everything like that. But my point, I think they left out, what I saw from different lobbying groups was the point that I feel really strongly about, is you're actually taking away the freedoms of the people who might be struggling with what they're in. There's so many stories and testimonies of people who, have chosen a particular lifestyle, with some sort of sexuality, and then they've left it at a certain point and said, wow, that was a time in my life that I went through, and now I've grown past that. Well, it's almost like we're taking away the way that someone can grow out of a particular lifestyle, or at least have it challenged, and them going, oh, okay, there might be a possibility out of this. It's such a...
That's right. So now, the thing is, there's always a mixture behind some of these policies. There's always a mixture of valid concerns and concerns that are
trumped up.
Trumped up, but also quite concerning. Like, for example, so I think the safetyism inherent in that is sort of behind that is concerning. But there are there are some valid concerns as well. I think it's one of my concerns here, and this is where the way that Christians do this is, I just think, so important, how we allow our voice to be heard, because the perception is that Christians are judgmental and bigoted. And so us arguing for you need to tolerate us, and our society is saying no, but we don't want to tolerate intolerance. Which in a sense is, that in itself is fair enough, but the what we need to try to solve is this misconception that we're being intolerant. And it's not always because, again, what is tolerance? Like, I believe certain things, but just because I believe certain things, that doesn't mean I'm not tolerating you, or that doesn't mean that I don't want to live in a society where you can do what you want. I mean, essentially, that's the kind of society that I want to live in. So I might disagree with someone, but I will say to them, I will argue, black and blue, for your right to actually believe what you believe. That I'm not going to I don't want to enforce my beliefs on you by law. Because then again, it comes back to the question of, how do people actually change their worldview? Well, it's not just having it enforced on them by law. No. It's through a process of spiritual transformation. And so there again, I get back to the central issue that, I think is of all importance here, and that is the question of how, what is the fundamental difference here? It's a fundamental difference of worldviews, and how is that going to change? It's only going to change by actually them understanding a bit more of the big picture of our worldview, and that big picture is a God who loves them, who is reaching out for them, who has come in Jesus Christ and is inviting them into this kind of a life of transformation. Even, and I think it's important to say, and this brings me back to this idea of the whole affirm the identity thing. It's important to recognize that it's not just Christians who would have a problem with this, you need to affirm who I am, this is my identity, and the problem of this solid identity. This is equally, if not more, of a problem within the Buddhist worldview, for example. See, in the Buddhist worldview, they hold to the doctrine of anatta, which is this idea that the self, the solid self, is actually an illusion. And so for someone to say, this is who I am, you need to affirm this is my identity, a Buddhist would say, no, that actually is one of the core pieces of ignorance and misconceptions that is that you need to be saved from. Okay, so a Buddhist equally would argue against that challenged. You need to affirm my identity.
We can go through most religions. Most world religions would have a problem with that worldview.
And in a sense, but there's also some compelling lines in philosophy also that would, and I like to point out some of these things. I sometimes point out the Buddhist example just because it's seen as the very it's like the popular
friendly,
intolerance, the ultimate, and look, I also point out that Christianity is not an intolerant faith. Actually, we don't think that we can change people just by forcing our faith on them, and so that puts us in a position of being completely tolerant of other views, because we don't want to force our views on other people. We want to be in a situation where we can talk openly about those and have a civil discussion about it, right? But I do like to use the Buddhist example again because due to the sort of popularity of that worldview. But I also refer to, I think, some compelling lines of philosophy that want to define selfhood, our self, in terms of a process of becoming. Yes. And this is, inherent in the existentialist strains, whether it's whatever form of existentialism, whether it's your more theistic form of existentialism coming from Kierkegaard. I mean, Kierkegaard is the Danish philosopher is known as the father of existentialism. He insisted that we as human beings are a process of becoming. He wanted we need to understand ourselves not as a solid thing, but as this process of ultimately relating to God, and that's a process, right? So it's all about movement. We're not this solid. And Kierkegaard's point is a theological one. He says God is the only absolute being. Yeah. Okay. We are existing. He refers to us as existing spirits in a process of becoming, and that means, Jean-Paul Sartre, who he took these ideas and put them within an atheistic worldview, but Jean-Paul Sartre famously says, I am what I am not, and I am not what I am. And his point is very esoteric, classic philosophy. Yeah. But his point was, I can never pin myself down and say, this is what I am, because I'm a unfolding process. Yeah. Okay. Now, what Kierkegaard wanted to do is actually define human beings in terms of that process, the key aspect of which was relating to God. So we are children of God in a process of relating to God, and that's an unfolding process thing. So his point is, if the relationship stops, how can you say, yes, I am this? Yeah. Because it's all about that process of transformation. This is also, the philosopher Heidegger. He really pushes this idea of becoming. This process of becoming. So even in philosophy, this idea of the solid self. This is what I am, and you need to affirm the way that I am. Heidegger would say that is the epitome of inauthenticity.
Wowee!
Yeah. Because actually, what we must the key thing in existence is, realizing our full potential, is coming to full potentiality. Yeah. But again, we come back to this idea, if we put this within a Christian worldview, then realizing our full potential means that for us there is an ideal. There is a God who this is fundamental to the Christian worldview. Yeah. There is a creator God who created things to be a certain way. Yeah. Okay? And I'm prepared to say to anyone, I'm not willing to let go of that. That is fundamental. Now, you might disagree with that, but there is a God who created us for a particular purpose, to live in a certain way. Now, I don't conform to that right now.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong.
And as a matter of fact, nobody does.
Nobody does. So all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Okay, yeah. So this is how I reverse. This is how the judgmental and bigoted thing can be dashed, right? Simply by not coming in the high horse, saying, "Look, I'm on this journey towards this ideal, and I want to invite everyone to be a part of this journey, because this is life, right? Living things grow. These are the exact things that I say to people, and I think. I think it makes a lot more sense. Rather than me saying, oh, yeah, you're wrong, you're getting back to the sexuality discussion, my sexuality is right, your sexuality is wrong. No, we are all not what we should be, but life is a process of becoming, towards an ideal. Now, there's a lot of mess on the way. We never actually fully get there. Yeah. We never fully get there in this life, but we're working towards this. It's this process of becoming. And so I think that gets rid of this idea of I'm right, you're wrong.
That's a great attitude to have as you walk into these, supposed situations. Okay, question as we wrap up. We're running out of time, as we always are on Thrive Perspectives. Is there ever a time where you go, I'm not even going to enter into this conversation, because you realise that the person is not interested in a conversation, really, that the person just wants to trip you up and trap you.
That's right. Well, I referred to, and we've had a few of these letters written to the church, just to test, and I think possibly looking for something to maybe put in the paper or whatever, and the big one is, are you willing to affirm? And I answer exactly as I've said, that I fundamentally believe identity is a far deeper level, and I feel like I'd be doing a disservice, and I will use every opportunity. So that's a classic example where it's just wanting to stir up trouble. Okay. Yep. But I'm concerned about them. I want them to hear something from a Christian that goes against their stereotype. And I feel like I owe that to them. It's not for me to judge whether they will or won't believe. You know what I mean? What I need to do is do the best that I can to represent my worldview, and to do that in a really loving way. Like, I want to do you, let's say you are that person, I want to do you I want to give you the respect of saying that your identity is way, way deeper than that. And I would really encourage you to embrace a life where we understand our selfhood in terms of this becoming something more than what we are. This transformation. I said, I'm part of that. I have found that life to be fullness of life. And
so you're saying
encouraging people to enter into that stream.
So there's never been a time where you've encountered someone who's been so aggressive or so one-eyed about it, who doesn't want to enter into that conversation?
There comes a point in the conversation where communication might break down, and sure. So there comes a point where it becomes clear that no, they actually have no interest. But I'm going to go as far as I can down that road, and I'm going to I'm going to point them, because ultimately that discussion comes back to this, that I believe that life is this, journey of transformation toward an ideal. I realize we disagree on this, but I, as a Christian, fundamentally believe that there is a God who created us for a purpose, and I'll stand for that ideal. So I'm not going to let go. I mean, this is one of the things we don't want to do, is water down our convictions. We don't want to let go of the ideals that God has for us, but neither should we ever convey the idea that somehow we live up to that and the other person doesn't.
That's a very good point.
That's the key thing. I'm on this journey, and I try to bring that back to the fact I'm only on this as an imperfect person. I'm only in this space. I'm only having this wonderful experience of being transformed by God because God came to us in Jesus Christ and put my life in the hands of God to make, to allow this imperfect creature to be put in the hands of God and lovingly reshaped. And I said, that to me is I just keep pointing people to that and inviting people to that. And then if they accept that invitation, they accept it. If not, they don't.
Yeah, it's a fine point. As we wrap up the episode, I'm still left thinking of I love how positive you are with this, Matt. You're coming at it from an incredibly optimistic point of view, which is wonderful. And to be honest with you, in real life, that's how I often come to it as well. But I just increasingly my optimism is getting a little bit pummeled at the moment with certain people that I meet and talk to. I'll give you an example, and comment on this however you want. I'll go back to my original examples, as I said, like working in this photography space over the decades, and meeting different people, and people of all walks of life. I'm talking from every type of lifestyle you can imagine, and then some, which is often the way with artists. You really are meeting with people who are living on the edges. They will get to know me and they will say, oh wow, you're not like one of those Christians. I can be myself around you. And I'm like, yeah, of course. And we talk openly and everything like that. But at a certain point, I've had this happen so often to me over the last few years, where, especially as people realize I've left the photography industry and gone into Christian media. So what happens then is people will start talking about different things, or expecting me, as you say, to affirm different things or throw out scenarios. I'll give you an example, changing names and stuff like that. Well, not mentioning any names. I've had someone say, "Oh, can you believe it that friends of mine, got married, are trans, or whatever scenario you want to make up there as far as a lifestyle choice, and one of their family members who says they're a Christian or are one of those type of Christians didn't go to their wedding / party / coming out / whatever it is. You're not like that. Thank God you're not like that, type of thing." And they're now on the positive side of me, the optimistic side of me is saying, well, they love me so much and they consider me to be such a friend that they would assume that I'm in the same boat as them. on the negative side of it, some of them are challenging to go, well, you listen, what actually does this mean? What does this Christian worldview mean? I've had to say to these people in a very gracious way, well, actually, I don't want to feel like I'm judging anybody, but I can understand where these people are coming from.
Yeah.
And I might not express it the same way. You're making it sound very hateful and everything like that. Maybe they weren't. There might have been a lot of pain for that family member to say, listen, I can't come along to this, whatever it is. But let me, we might be on different pages than what you think. And there's always a sense of shock and horror on this person that you're not exactly what they wanted you to be. You're not the exactly progressive Christian throwing off the shackles of that they thought that you were being.
Yeah. See, in situations like that, and that's an interesting example of, so let's say you have, a gay couple and they're together and, well, can you affirm this relationship and so forth? I think the question we need to be clear on in our own minds is what most needs to change in these people's lives, and their sexuality isn't the thing initially that most needs to change. What most needs to change is that they need to realize that there is a God who has an absolute claim on their lives, who loves them, sent His Son to bring them to Himself.
Amen.
That's the key change that they need. And so, I think we need to be prepared to go to where people are to advocate for that, leaving the other stuff aside for the moment. You know what I mean? I'm just gonna sit with you at your table. I'm not going to put conditions on that, or I'm going to invite you, to our table as you are, not demanding that you change. Because the first message that I want to convey and represent through my openness and testimony, not through jamming it down your throat, but that I want to represent and embody and shine out is this fundamental notion that there is a God who loves us and is drawing us to Himself. And I think that is a start in complicated situations like this. Ask yourself, what is the most important thing in this situation? What is the most important message that this person needs to get in this situation? Because in a messy world, there's always going to be compromise as an element of. It's always going to feel like an element of compromise. It's like Jesus at Matthew's house having a meal with all of these sinners and tax collectors and whatever, and it's for him there was an unconditional connection. I'm going to go to your party because the thing that I want you most to know is that I love you and that God loves you, and that and that God is calling you to Himself. And so I'm going to be there for you to convey that message. So and of course to Jesus onlookers, that looked like compromise. They saw that as compromise.
That looked like Jesus affirming the sin.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so how do we in 2020, thousands of years after Jesus sitting with tax collectors, how do we rightfully discern what is, because we might be going there with the spirit of Jesus, of saying we want to share this with you. They might be inviting us there to affirm what they're doing. How do we walk this tightrope?
This is the thing. Every situation is different, isn't it? And it's very difficult to generalize at this point, and you just can't make a blanket rule. It depends
because we've got young people.
Depends on the context, depends on the relationship, depends on where that conversation is at any given time. What kind of understanding is set up? I mean, and I just think you need to be clear on the goal. What is the goal here? What is the biggest issue in this person's life? It's not any moral issue. It's a spiritual issue. And so we need to put those other issues aside and focus on the spiritual issue and try to establish that a spiritual connection, because we can, through love, we establish spiritual connections with people, and we need to create a context in which we can be bold witnesses to God's invitation through Jesus Christ. That's what I mean by focusing on the gospel. A lot of people think that, the message is standing up for, Christian morals in this situation. No, that's not the mission. The mission is to represent the message of the gospel, God's invitation. Once people have that transforming encounter with Jesus Christ, that's how their worldview changes. Right. That's when all of the moral and ethical stuff will start to make sense.
Yeah.
And may I say, I know. Look, you said that I was optimistic, but my optimism is framed within, for example, Matthew 13, the parable of the seeds.
Yes.
There were 4 different examples of the seed on the path and on the rocky ground and the weeds and so forth. So there's 4 different seeds, and only 1/4 of the seeds, according to that parable, landed on good soil. Okay,
75% not so good.
Yeah, so I'm aware, but Jesus doesn't say, so don't scatter seeds anymore.
Yeah.
His point is, go scatter the seeds, but understand that a lot of it is not going to bear fruit. But there will be good soil, so don't make judgments about which is the good soil. Yeah. Just scatter the good seed, which is the message of the kingdom of God, the good news of the kingdom of God, the fact that God is drawing us under his loving rule through Jesus Christ, and leave the rest to God. Yeah. I think that's the key thing. It's all about focus, and the more focused we are on the gospel and what God is doing and on representing that, I think the more effective we will be as Christians.
Thanks for listening to Thrive Perspectives. We want to hear from you, so send us your big questions and ideas. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, download other shows, see all of our resources and much, much more at our website, thrivetoday.tv. The Thrive Today Network is on Facebook. Our Facebook page and links to our community groups are waiting for you. Just search and like Thrive Today page in Facebook now. Visiting the website ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Perspectives really helps us reach more people. So head to ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Perspectives. We hope that these shows will challenge you to look at life from a new perspective and thrive. This was another DJP.FM production.